1939. And as some of you might know it, it's quite a phenomenon that newly created and restored states had common feature. This is a political, social, and economic and cultural optimism. So Kaunas was once such a capital, and with the help of this presentation, we will look at how this optimism was reflected in the architecture. And the presenter is Marija Drėmaitė. She is a professor at Vilnius University Faculty of History. Her research is focused on 20th century architecture, industrial culture, and cultural heritage. She creates exhibitions and publishes books on architectural history. And if you haven't heard in the beginning, since the microphone was a little bit low, Architecture of Optimism, Designing a New Kaunas in 1919 1939. Let's welcome Maria on stage.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be with the designers. And in this presentation today, I'm going to tell you a story of how a design history of a city can be interpreted as an exhibition and later maybe turned into a brand. I'm a historian of architecture, and when I was commissioned to curate an international exhibition about Kaunas modernism, it was important for me to find some universal idea that could be shared by the global audience. Together with my fellow colleagues, art historians Vaidas Petrulis, Giedrė Jankevičiūtė, designer Linas Gliaudelis, and the copywriter Žygimantas Kudirka, we agreed that it should be architecture of optimism, reflected in a universal modernist design element, a porthole window logo taken from an existing building in Kaunas, of course. Optimism may sound as a new architectural style, but it is not. Optimism is a state of mind and an outlook that the outcome of one's efforts will be both positive and desirable. There was no shortage of optimism in Europe between the two world wars. After the collapse of great European empires and the end of the World War I, new independent states appeared on the European map. These countries shared an optimistic vision of a more promising future. The multitude of avant garde experiments testifies to the fact that the construction and modernization of independent states in Eastern and Central Europe was a phenomenon. And I particularly like this picture, this photograph taken by the female photographer Vera Šleivytė, which in a way still shows that in the background the city is rather chaotic with a lot of signs of imperial legacy. But in the foreground, we see already this optimistic enjoyment of modernist environment, sitting on the flat concrete roof, half naked body, enjoying the sun light and air, all these modernistic features. In February 1918, the founders of the newly proclaimed independent Republic of Lithuania declared Vilnius to be the capital. By 1919, however, geopolitical tensions and territorial conflicts with Bolshevik Russia and Poland forced Lithuania's government to quickly relocate to the country's second largest city, Kaunas, which took a unique status, that of the provisional capital. It was the only provisional capital in the world at the time, and the opportunities arising from such a status were exploited to the fullest there. As the provisional capital of Lithuania from 1919 to 1939, Kaunas became an example of rapid urbanization and modernization. Renewal was the central goal of many European cities, particularly those that became administrative capitals. In 1919, Lithuanian government arrived in a small provincial city, the center of the former Kaunas governorate of Imperial Russia. Most believed that their stay in Kaunas would be brief, As long as there was hope to recover Vilnius through diplomatic talks, segments of Kaunas elite felt that investing in construction in the country's second city would mean resigning themselves to the loss of Vilnius. Therefore, the modernization of Kaunas was not the result of a deliberate modernist plan, but of civic initiatives and spontaneous functional modernization, improvements in sanitation, hygiene, the introduction of social and engineering infrastructure, and the construction of new housing. It was even more important than the architectural style or design because the city's engineering infrastructure, modern transportation, and comfortable housing with modern facilities helped Kaunas cast aside its former image as a provincial Russian imperial town and present itself as a modern European metropolis. Over the next 20 years, the city undertook a rapid territorial and demographic leap forward. The city limits expanded 7 times, and the population almost doubled, reaching 155,000. 12,000 permits for construction were issued during this period. Many foreigners who visited Kaunas in 1930s took notice of the city's rapid and radical transformation. In 1938, German journalist Victor Zinhaus called Kaunas a metropolis, changing as quickly as cities in America. Estonian architect Hanno Kompus said that he can only envy his colleagues in Kaunas and their architectural freedom to choose construction forms that satisfy modern expectations of beauty. For such a construction boom, the national technical elite had to be raised. While the senior generation of architects and designers had been trained in technical schools in the Russian Empire, the new generation of Kaunas architects born after 1900 were encouraged to study in Western European architectural schools. Indeed, Western education was a part of the official national policy at the time. Lithuanian government had approved a program of allocating scholarships for foreign study as early as in 1919. And around 60 architects and construction engineers of practicing 400 at the end of the 30s had obtained their degrees in Berlin, Bauhaus, Rome, Prague, Paris, Grenoble, Brussels, Ghent, and elsewhere. All these graduates eventually returned to Kaunas, where they helped shape a new generation of specialists working in both service, civil service, and private practice in the 30s. The University of Lithuania was established, the Higher School of Technology and the School of Arts were all engaged in designing new modernist Kaunas. Though Europe's new countries adopted modernism as the foundation of a new national architecture, they were faced with the dilemma of reconciling modernity with the pursuit of unique national identities. We can interpret that this spring of nations only came to these nations not in the 19th century but in the interwar period. And this creation of national styles based on folk art or historical references became a central component of the effort to balance modernist aspirations with national state ideologies. The shaping of Lithuania's national identity was oriented toward a modern future, even as it rested on the grandeur of the medieval aristocratic Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the heritage of a rural ethnic Lithuanian culture. Facades were modern, as we can see in this building of the Central Post Office, built and opened in 1930 by Felixas Visbaras. But in the interior design of public buildings, architects and designers did not shy away from incorporating decorative details of national style. And in the interior, you can see the interpretation of floor tiling based on the image of the folk textiles, or in the officers club that was specially built. And of course we understand that during this period full of tensions and territorial tensions, it was important to the role of military was very important in these countries. And we can see decorative elements that emphasize the territorial integrity of the country, but in the interior design we can also see a lot of references to the medieval glory, to the how the contemporary national style could be expressed. And most often you can see the competition for the president's hall, where these elements were mostly expressed in Art Deco style and how it was later implemented. Functional modernization in Kaunas was the imperative of building a truly modern society. Residents built modern schools, banks, neighborhoods, and houses of worship that left an enduring mark of the city's architectural space, and they were much more functional from outside and from within. But the creation of modern housing became one of the new capital's most significant attributes in terms of quality, quantity, and architectural diversity. 7,000 permits for construction and reconstruction of houses was issued. The Republic of Lithuania recovered control of its historical capital, Vilnius, in 1939. Kaunas was left with a host of unfinished projects. After the World War II and during the years of Soviet occupation, Kaunas was developed as the center of heavy industry, but its interwar architecture and interior design survived as a living and enduring testament to the legacy of the independent Lithuanian state. This architectural heritage transformed into the legend of interwar Kaunas, testimonials to a culture and way of life that differed from the imposed Soviet system and sustained the cultural identity of the city's inhabitants. Even the new construction, as you can see, the comparison of the Vienybės Square in the 30s and the 70s, you can see that the new building, new large state planning institutes for urban design and for industrial design followed the volume tradition and the material from interwar period. Though the majority of modernist architects had left the country when in 44 they escaped the Red Terror, Kaunas could still count on the expertise of a sufficient number of remaining specialists, and most importantly, a school of architecture that retained its ties to the interwar generation even during the Soviet era, and inspired new architects studying and working in Kaunas in the 60s. The physical state of interwar modernist buildings was not deliberately neglected, since the superior quality of this architecture was put to a pragmatic use. Many new buildings were compatible with interwar period of development by being restrained in volume and style. Decades of Soviet occupation led to the emergence of patriotic romanticizing of the interwar period, and after the re-establishment of Lithuanian independence in 1990, the restoration of the city's symbolic buildings from the interwar period became an important sign of renewal. But in this picture, you can see that the Freedom Monument from the interwar period was restored already 1 year before the official declaration of independence, which showed that the importance of Kaunas and this physical legacy that was present then taken now, and the importance of putting it back. Today, the legacy of Kaunas interval architecture and design has been rediscovered. People rekindle the memory of modernism through guided tours, presentations, events, and building restoration programs. The interval heritage has become the optimistic foundation of the identity of contemporary Kaunas. It can be said that and even Kaunas is European Capital of Culture 2022 program once had this slogan from temporary to contemporary. So you can see that the European Heritage Label was awarded in 2015. UNESCO City of Design, Kaunas became also in 2015. And it's not very often that architecture and design becomes part of the European Cultural Capital Program. But in Kaunas, it happened. A special program, Modernism for the Future, was established. And my final slide shows another step in recognition of Kaunas modernism. It's a cover of the Lithuanian nomination for the UNESCO World Heritage List. And you can see that we exploit the same architecture of optimism as a brand. Because unlike many experiences of urban and architectural modernity, Kaunas reflects an evolutionary rather than revolutionary process of modernization. The case of Kaunas provides arguments for the decentralization of modernism, not only in the geographical sense, but also in terms of stylistic expression. One of the outstanding values of the Kaunas modernism is its architectural diversity. By integrating and locally interpreting the principles of modern movement, Kaunas architects developed, and not only architects, but also the civic society, developed their own style, displaying a bold plurality of modern architectural expression in response to local needs and exigencies. Thank you. Uh-huh.
Thank you, Maria. Great presentation and a lovely city, Kaunas. So I guess the guests from all over the world might not knew quite some facts, but we know, we who live here and around. Anyone has any questions about the optimism of Kaunas? I'm looking around. Yeah, we have one. Let's share the microphone.
Thank you so much. Beautiful city. Curious for new building developments, are there certain guidelines that need to be followed to ensure the consistency of modernity in new structures?
Yes, when this nomination for the UNESCO World Heritage List was made, it is not only the selection of particular buildings, it's the urban design, what we are presenting. It's the two territories, the development on the imperial part of the city, on the imperial grid, and then the new part of the garden city with the new housing and villas. But it is not a new thing in Kaunas. These two areas have been already protected since 2000 and even early. Separate buildings were already protected. So, of course, there is the regulation, but it is not always followed. So the problems are the same as everywhere.
Theory and practice is something that go along. I have a question that I have a chance to ask. I heard this theory of why flats that were built in between the wars in Kaunas, they have really high ceiling. They are sometimes called smetoniški butai. Smetona was the president of that time. It's called Smetona's flats. And I heard that the answer was it was because the people were very optimistic about the future and they thought they are building their houses for a century or so, like in the Roman times. Is it an urban legend or has any truth?
Well, we can develop it as a mythology, but or urban myth, but it's not exactly the correct answer. What you it was the standards of construction, and a lot of designers followed actually the German standards for planning functional apartments. But in the city center, of course, these apartments are luxurious because we sometimes forget to look at architecture and design through class. So it was for the more wealthy residents of Kaunas. But if you look at wooden architecture or wooden houses in the outskirts of Kaunas, they don't have 3-meter ceiling. No,
Yeah.
usually not.
Yeah, now students live in those flats. There can be quite cold during the winter,
Mhm.
but still look beautiful.
But
Okay.
I believe that in these luxurious apartments, the top standard housing was created that was never superseded, not even in these days.
I think some of us can agree. Okay, thank you very much, Maria. A round of applause.